Hi, welcome back. We are going to be continuing in chapter 5 about tissues. This is going to be the second video, and in this video, we're going to be going through slides 26 through 46. So that's going to be the entire section of connective tissues. Now, just a reminder, there are 4 primary tissue types. We've already done epithelia, and then today we're going to do connective tissue, or in this video, we'll do connective tissue. The next one will be over the muscular tissue and the neuronal tissue or nervous tissue. So there are four primary tissue types. And today what we're going to talk about is the connective tissue. And I'm going to end up introducing you to 12 different specific types of tissues that fall into 4 different categories. So by the end of this video, you should be able to describe the function and structure of 12 different specific types of connective tissue. All right, so let's go ahead and pull up the slides and open that up. All right. So connective tissue characteristics. They are the most widely distributed throughout your body, and they are the most diverse. So at first, they don't seem like they all belong together. So bone is going to be in here. Blood is going to be in here. What do bone and blood have to do with each other? Tendons, cartilage, different types of different types of fibrous tissue. All of these things don't seem like they go together very well, but they all have the same characteristic of having a lot of extracellular matrix. Now, to understand what extracellular matrix is, you have to go back to 112, but extracellular matrix is when you have a cell. So this is the cell membrane. The nucleus is on the inside. And the cells that make up connective tissue put out a lot of extracellular matrix. So what that means is they put out a lot of fibers outside the cell, extracellular. That means outside the cell. They put out a lot of fibers, which are protein fibers. And then they also put out a lot of fluids. And some of them are thick fluids and some are thin fluids. And that's called ground substance. So the cells in bone are actually making a lot of ooey gooey liquid bone that then turns into bone. So bone cells, osteocytes, will oozy out this fluid bone that then turns into hard bone. Cartilage does the same thing. Bone or blood cells put out a lot of extracellular matrix that's then dissolved in the plasma. And so it's soluble, but then when needed, the fibers, the protein fibers, come out of solution and grab hold of each other and form a clot. So bone, blood, cartilage, all of these cells are going to make a lot of extracellular matrix, which is made up of protein fibers, long fibers, and then also ground substance, which is a fluid or a thick fluid or even a solid, a fluid that turns into a solid. Most connective tissues are vascular. That means that they have blood flowing to them. There are a few that don't, and I'll be mentioning those as we go. The function of different connective tissues, because connective tissues are so varied, there are many different types of functions associated with connective tissue. So the first is transport. So blood is going to be transporting glucose, it's going to be transporting oxygen, it's going to be transporting hormones, all kinds of different things. So transport. The next one is function. Also in the blood cells, in the blood, we have white blood cells. And those white blood cells are going to be fighting off infection and giving you immunity. Locomotion. That means your body locomotes, your body moves because of the bones and the cartilage and the muscles that connect all of the tendons that connect the muscle to your bones. Heat production. Adipose is fat, and adipose is a type of connective tissue, and Adipose, when it releases its energy, it releases heat, especially brown fat, which is found primarily in infants. So a nice chubby baby is good, not too chubby, but a nice chubby baby is good because they have brown fat that's going to keep them warm. And we want to make sure that they keep their body temperature up. They don't have a lot of little muscles yet. Okay, binding. We're going to be binding muscles to bone. That's going to be tendons and ligaments. And adipose also is going to be packed around different organs. You'll see that next term when you get to dissect a heart. There's actually a lot of fat attached to the heart, and it's for binding things together, gluing things together. Energy storage, that's what fat's for. Structural support, that's what bone, cartilage are for. Also, these things called reticular fibers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Structural support is a function of connective tissue. And then protection. So your skeleton is made up of bone. Bone is going to protect your heart, your organs, and your head. All right, fibrous connective tissue. So I'm going to go ahead and stop a share just for a moment. And I want to do a new share of the whiteboard. So now we're going to go through very specific types of connective tissues. There are 4 subtypes of connective tissues. So there is fibrous connective tissue. There is adipose. There is supportive. And there is fluid. So these are subtypes of connective tissues. So under fibrous, we're going to meet 5 different specific types of connective tissue. We're going to meet areolar tissue. I have it all written down over here, so I'm keep looking over. Reticular tissue, dense, regular, dense, irregular, and elastic fibrous tissue. So we're going to go through all of these individually in just a second, but I wanted you to see the 4 major subtypes and then the individual specific types that we're going to learn about today. Adipose, that one's pretty easy. There's just adipose. So there's only one representative of this subtype. Supportive is going to be bone and cartilage. Excuse me, I should turn my phone off. Within the cartilage, there are 3 different specific types of cartilage. There is hyaline cartilage. There is elastic cartilage. And there is fibrocartilage. And then within the fluids, there is blood and another fluid called lymph. Okay, so you will be responsible for learning the 4 subtypes and then all these individual specific types as well. So we're going to go through them. I'm going to go through them pretty fast. You will spend time with these in lab, so you'll have more time to learn about them when we're there in lab. All right, let's go back to our slides. Okay, so the fibrous connective tissues, there were 5 different types that we were going to learn about here. So they are the most diverse of all of them. It's also called connective tissue proper. So if you are in a different class and a different instructor, they might call it, instead of fibrous connective tissue, they might call it connective tissue proper. In these fibrous connective tissues, they have obvious fibers, and the different types of fibrous connective tissues are going to have different fiber types, and we're going to be able to look for those fiber types and then be able to name the different types of tissues. The different kinds of cells that make up these fibrous connective tissues are fibroblasts, mesenchymal cells, mast cells, are our three primary ones. Fibroblasts are the most common. Fibroblasts are cells that make fibrous connective tissue. So they're going to be the ones making the extracellular matrix. The mesenchymal cells are embryonic stem cells, so very early embryonic stem cells that are going to give rise to all of the other fibrous connective tissues. Mast cells are a specific type of immune cell that produce histamine and are going to fight any microbes or pathogens that get into your connective tissues. So the picture over here on the left is a picture of the extracellular matrix coming off of these different kinds of cells. So the entire thing, this entire picture, is a fibrous connective tissue. There are cells in here which are, the fibroblast cell is the purple one, and it's the one that's actually oozing out the extracellular matrix. So these long fibers that we see, the red ones and the orangey ones, those fibers are being produced by the fibroblasts. There are mesenchymal cells in some of the tissues, and they're going to divide and actually become fibroblasts in most cases. And then there are also the mast cells, which are not in this picture, but mast cells are going to be spread out, just dotting throughout the entire connective tissue. All right, I said tissue fibers. So the fibers, fibrous connective tissue makes fibers. There are three different types of fibers. There are collagen fibers, there are reticular fibers, and there are elastic fibers. Some fibrous connective tissue has just collagen. Some has just reticular fibers, some has just elastic, and then some has all of them together. So this picture here on the right, it actually has all three types. The elastic fiber is usually, when you see it in a microscope, is wiggly waggly, and it's very skinny. So it's very, very fine. The collagen fibers are thicker, and they're definitely thicker than anything else. Okay, so that's good enough. So let's talk about ground substance. Ground substance is the fluid that's put out around the fibers, and it's gelatinous. It can be very, very thick, or it can be very, very thin, depending on what kind of proteins and molecules are there. The two common proteins that are the two common molecules that make up ground substance in these fibrous connective tissues are glycosaminoglycans, or GACs, which are polysaccharides. So they're sugary, they're like starch. And there are specific types of GAGs. Chondroitin sulfate and hyaluronic acid are two specific types, and they are polysaccharides, but they are liquidy and fluid. They are very attractive to water, so they hold water. So if you ever get some cartilage, like if you take a chicken and you look at the cartilage at the ends of the bones and you squish it, that there's going to be fluid in there. That's because there are these polysaccharides that are there, and they're holding water. All right, if we take some of these GAGs and we stick them on proteins, we make proteoglycans. And proteoglycans are what makes up the majority of the goo outside of cells. So if we have specific proteins and specific GAGs, then our ground substance is fluidy, or it's thick and gelatinous. Some of these proteoglycans are really adhesive, like glue. So if you think about glue, or you think about the stuff that's on tape, then that is really sticky. That's a proteoglycan that is going to help stick cells together. So here's pictures of proteoglycans together. They're just really big molecules. And so there's a protein here in the center. And then there are all of these ladder-like things, or whatever you want to call them, antenna-like things. All of those are sugars, polysaccharides, or GAGs. All of those stick on there together, and then they hold onto water. So they're fluid because they hold on to water. All right, so now we're going to go through the individual specific types of fibrous connective tissue. The first one is areolar tissue, and this one is the most common type of fibrous connective tissue. It is loose connective tissue, which means that if we look at it, we see lots of fibers, and we see fibers, but then we see a lot more ground substance. So it's a loose fibers together. Most of the fibers are collagen, but then we can have a little bit of elastic too. So it is the most widely distributed, which means it's the most common. We're going to find it right underneath the skin. We're going to find it in mucous membranes and serous membranes with that epithelial tissue on the top. So they're going to be really nice because, and they're vascular, so they have a lot of blood supply. The function is that they support and bind other tissues. So they make up that basement membrane. So the areolar tissue is making up the basement membrane for those epithelial cells. And they're also going to be holding a lot of body fluids, because I said that those antennas that were sticking out the protein, they're attracted to water. And so water comes and we store water around those proteoglycans. And then we're also going to have macrophages and white blood cells. So these are immune cells that are going to live in these tissues. So here's a picture of the areolar loose connective tissue. The fibers are the strings that you can see throughout. And then these are cell nuclei that we can see in here. Those are fibroblasts primarily. And the ground substance is all the fluid that is between all of that stuff. So this area right here, we see a lot of empty space. That empty space is actually filled up with fluid or ground substance. So we're going to find areolar tissue underneath the skin. We're going to find areolar tissue in basement membranes to give support and to hold water and fluids for you. Reticular tissue. Reticular tissue is I think one of the most beautiful kinds of tissue. It is going to have reticular fibers. That's why it's called a reticular tissue. And it makes up a spongy inside to a lot of different organs. So we find it in the lymphatic system. You don't even know what that is yet, but we have it a lot in the spleen, the liver, the kidney. So it makes up the inside of the tissue, and it looks like, to me, it looks like a bunch of grapes on vines. So the vines are the reticular tissues. Here, these strings that are spread out. And then you see the balls. The balls are grapes that are on the vines. And what the reticular tissues do is that they make up this spongy network that has all these individual spaces for connections to hold mostly white blood cells. So we can hold our cells inside the organ and keep it protected. And it just gives an internal skeleton, an internal framework to specific organs. So we're going to find them in specific organs like the spleen, which is what the picture is here. So we've done areolar tissue, reticular tissue, and now we're going to look at dense regular and dense irregular connective tissue. So dense regular tissue is going to have lots of fibers that are all lined up and perfectly aligned. So you can see that in this picture. They're perfectly aligned. They look like waves together. Those are collagen proteins. So they're packed tightly. That's why they're dense. And it's regular because they're all lined up together. This makes for a really strong material that's not necessarily stretchy, but it withholds lots of stress. And so that means we're going to use it to connect muscle to bone, bone to bone, so tendons and ligaments. So that means that if I pull it in one direction, it's going to be really strong, slightly stretchy, but really strong. If think about like a really strong bodybuilder, they have got big muscles connected to their bones, big muscles connected to their bones through tendons. And every time they use those great big super duper muscles, they're pulling on the bone, And that is a lot of pressure. That is a lot of, that's a tense situation. So this dense regular connective tissue is what we find most commonly there. Dense irregular connective tissue is going to have these collagen fibers and other fibers, but they're mostly going to be woven together in a mesh. So you can see that down here. So there's fibers running all different directions to make a nice net or a nice a mesh. And what they're good at is holding, taking care of stress and connections where we have different movements, multiple directions of movement. So we're going to find this in the dermis, which is your skin, the underlying layer of your skin. So when you stretch, and move, your skin stretches with you, which is really nice. And you move in lots of different directions. Your skin can move all kinds of different directions. And so you want to have this dense irregular connective tissue to allow you to move different directions. So dense regular connective tissue is going to be for movement in one direction. Dense irregular connective tissue is going to give you support when you're moving multiple directions. The last type of fibrous connective tissue is the elastic tissue. Elastic tissue has a lot of elastic fibers. So elastic fibers are specialized because they can stretch and then they go back together. So they're elastic, they stretch and then they go back together. So we're going to have these in places where we do a lot of stretching and going back together. That's going to happen in your bladder. Your bladder is going to stretch when it's full, and then it's going to go back together when it's empty. Okay, we want it to go back together. Your larger blood vessels. So think about your aorta. That is the largest blood vessel that you have, coming right off the heart. When the heart pumps, it pushes blood into the aorta at very high pressure, and that stretches the aorta. We want it to go back to smaller when it doesn't have that high pressure. And it's because every time your heart beats, that means that it's stretching, going back, stretching, going back, stretching, going back. So we want this elastic tissue to be woven in around your aorta to make sure that it goes back. Same thing is true in your lungs. Every time you take a breath, your lungs expand. And then when you breathe out, your lungs decrease. You want them to go back to their original position. So elastic tissue, if we look at it here, elastic tissue usually has elastic fibers. It always has elastic fibers. But if you look at the elastic fibers, they look like this. And what that means is it's going to be able to stretch out straight and then boing, go back to its original shape. Okay, so we've just talked about the fibrous connective tissues, and we talked about 5 different types. We talked about areolar connective tissue. We talked about reticular tissue. We talked about dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic tissues. So these are for connecting things together, and when you look at them, you see fibers, obvious fibers. We're going to go into the next major subtype, which is adipose tissue. So we're still in connective tissues, but now we're talking about adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is fat, what we think of as fat. It's made up of cells called adipocytes, and adipocytes basically fill up with oil. And as you use the oil goes out. As you eat, oil goes back in. So adipocytes are constantly getting bigger and smaller, depending on your nutrition. They hold very little water because it's oil. Oil and water don't mix very well. They are metabolically active, which means that most of the time you have the same number of adipocytes. But if you start to eat way too much, you start to gain a lot of weight, they will divide and they will make more adipocytes. And then those new adipocytes will stick around for the rest of your life. There is no way for adipocytes to die. They can get smaller because they give up their oils. But if you have gotten obese, if you have gained a lot of weight, then you will always have those adipocytes there and they can fill up really quickly. They are located they're subcutaneous, which means they're right underneath the skin and around different organs. Males and females put their fat in different places. The function of adipocytes or of adipose tissue is to provide energy for you and to support, remember to glue things together, but also to protect. So you've got, you have some fat around most of your major organs, and that fat is there for support and adhesion. So these look really funky. You can't see, what you're looking at is here's an individual cell, here's an individual cell, and you can't see in this picture the nucleus. The nuclei are stuffed over to a side. So like here, there would be one on this very side. What you're seeing is that clear is oil. So there is a membrane and then a bunch of oil. And so we can't see any organelles like the nucleus in this picture. So they're great big fat cells with nothing inside. It looks like nothing inside, but there's oil. All right, so we've done two subtypes. We've done the fibrous connective tissue, and now we've done the adipose tissue. Now we're going to talk supporting connective tissue. Supporting connective tissue is going to be giving your body shape and form. And we have cartilage and we have bone. We're going to talk about cartilage first. Cartilage has a thick rubbery matrix. So it's ooey, it's squeezable. So think about the stuff that's at the end of a chicken bone. That's cartilage. And you can squeeze it and it goes back to its original shape. So it's rubbery. The cells that make up cartilage are called chondroblasts. You're going to hear the word blast in this class multiple times. Blast means builder. So it's a builder of cartilage. And most of the cartilage that you make is going to be made in early development. Chondrocytes are going to be our original cartilage maker cells. They're going to sit and then they're going to make ooey gooey cartilage. The cartilage is going to partially solidify around them. And the little space that they're in is called the lacuna. So the little cave that they're in is called a lacuna, a circular cave around the cell. When the chondrocyte is surrounded and trapped by cartilage, then it is now called a chondroblast. So the chondrocyte is the cell that is then surrounded by a lacuna, and it's now called a chondroblast. This is the only avascular connective tissue. So cartilage does not have blood flow. This is really important if you have someone who comes to you in your medical clinic and they have destroyed some cartilage. Cartilage doesn't grow back very well. Cartilage is extremely slow to grow back because it doesn't have blood flow. So blood flow is where it's going to get all the nutrients to grow again and to be replaced. So cartilage, if you have damage to your cartilage, then it's a big problem for a very long time. So, and that's because it is avascular. So it heals really slowly. There are three types of cartilage, and they differ in how tough they are and how flexible they are. So hyaline cartilage is our first type of cartilage. You're going to find that in the end of your nose and at the end of your ribs and in your trachea. So you can feel your trachea through your neck. If you push on it, there's kind of a bumpy area. That's hyaline cartilage. The nose, at the end of your nose, that's hyaline cartilage. It is made up of many, many dense collagen fibers that we can't see with a microscope. It is slightly flexible. And when we look at it in a picture like this, what you can see is that there are many chondrocytes that are inside the lacuna. The lacuna is the lighter circle. So the entire dark purple thing is the cell. So that's not a nucleus, that's the cell. And then the bigger circle around it is the lacuna. And then all the space between these cells That's filled with ground substance and densely packed collagen, which you cannot see. Okay. So in this picture, we have chondrocytes, lacuna, and the matrix, which is made up of lots of collagen that you can't see the individual fibers. So it looks like it's clear, but then it's filled with lots and lots of collagen and then some ground substance. The second type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage is more flexible than hyaline. It's not going to break easily. Like your nose can actually break and break apart. The cartilage on your ribs can break. The elastic cartilage is way more elastic, so that's way more stretchy and way more flexible. You're going to see this in the external ear and in your epiglottis. You may not know what the epiglottis is yet, but your external ear, that's this guy. So if you have ear piercings that are up in the higher upper part of your ear, that's gone through elastic cartilage, and that's why it closes up so easily, and why you have to take really great care, because it's cartilage, so it heals really, really slow. So you can't take the earring out or whatever of your elastic cartilage, because it'll close up as it heals very slowly. So when we look at elastic cartilage, it looks a little bit different. We have lacuna. We have cells that are inside the lacuna that you can barely see, and then we can see elastic fibers. So the difference between hyaline cartilage and elastic cartilage is that we can see the elastic cartilage fibers inside. The last type of cartilage is fibrocartilage, and fibrocartilage has visible collagen fibers. So hyaline cartilage had invisible collagen, and now we're going to see in fibrocartilage visible collagen. So the collagen fibers are thicker in this case. This is really tough, absorbs compressive shock. We're going to see this in places where we have a lot of pressure. So intervertebral discs means we're going to see invertebral discs that are in between your vertebra. So your vertebra makes up your backbone, and in between each one of those vertebrae, there's a disc of fibrocartilage, and it is taking a lot of hammering every time you move, every time you stand, every time you take a step. And it's that fibrocartilage that breaks down as we age to make you shorter. So if you have looked at grandma and you compare grandma when she was 20 years old to when she was 80 years old, she got a lot shorter. That's because every one of those intervertebral discs has gotten broken down. The menisci of the knee, so where the two bones come together at your knee, there is fibrocartilage, and that also breaks down every time you take a step. So it is strong. It is able to withstand a lot of pressure, but over time it's going to break down, but it's really tough. If we look at it, we see a lot fewer chondrocytes in lacuna, and we see a lot of fibers. Okay, and these fibers are fatter and flatter than the elastic ones. They are fatter and flatter than the elastic cartilage that we saw before. All right, so we're talking about supportive connective tissue. We're talking about cartilage right now, and there's 3 different types of cartilage. And then there is, so here's a picture of fibrocartilage. You can see the fibers here. Thick, nice fibers, all lined up together. Okay, and then bone is the other type of supporting fiber. We are going to spend a lot more time talking about bone and the bone tissue in the next chapters when we get into the skeletal system. But bone is also called osseous tissue. So ossea, or OSS, always means bone or skeleton. So bone is a type of osseous tissue. The mature cells are called osteocytes, and they are also living in lacuna. So, oh, and I made a mistake. So back here, I want to go back. When we talk about here, I made a mistake, and I did it backwards. So let me erase all the ink. Chondroblasts are going to be the cells that ooze out the liquid cartilage. Once the cartilage solidifies, the cell that is trapped is called the chondrocyte. I had that backwards when I explained it before. So a chondrocyte is the mature cell, a chondroblast is the immature cell. So the chondroblast is going to make the liquid cartilage that then hardens and solidifies and traps the chondrocyte in a lacuna. Okay, so I had that backwards. So I want to go back over to bone. Bone has the same kind of thing. We have osteoblasts that are going to ooze out liquid bone, and then that bone's going to solidify and trap that cell inside a lacuna. The lacuna is trapping a osteocyte. So the osteoblast builds by oozy. It solidifies and traps the osteocyte. So the osteocyte, it has a C in it. The C lives in a cave, and the cave's name is lacuna. Okay, the bone tissue obviously is really, really strong, and it's got a lot of collagen in it, and it also has calcium phosphate. So we're going to talk about that when we get into the bone skeletal system. So bone is made up of collagen proteins and calcium phosphate. So bone is made up of protein and calcium phosphate. So a lot of times we just think about bone as really hard, but bone also has collagen in it, so it is slightly flexible. So bone is for support, protection, storage of fats and minerals, production of blood cells. There's just so many different things, and we will talk about that in the skeletal system. But for right now, what you need to know is that bone is has these multiple things going on. Bone is very vascular, where cartilage was avascular, no vascularization, no blood supply. Bone is really bloody, and we don't think about that. Bone has got all kinds of capillaries coming into it and bringing blood and bringing nutrients and bringing other things to the osteocytes and feeding those osteocytes so that they can take care of your bone. That means that if you have damage to your bone, it's going to get fixed really fast. If you have damage to your cartilage, it's going to not get fixed very fast, okay, because of the vascularity between the two. This is bone tissue. It's one of my favorites. It looks so pretty how it's organized. We're going to learn about the organization later. You don't have to learn about the organization now, but here in the center is where the blood supply is and where there's some nerves that come in. And then there are concentric circles around here. And in the concentric circles, there are spots or dark spots. Those dark spots are the lacuna, and they house the osteocytes. So there are multiple osteocytes in circles around the blood supply and getting good blood supply so that they grow and they can constantly change. So I think bone is one of the most obvious connective tissues for us to be easily identifiable. All right, the last type of tissue is connective tissue, is fluid connective tissue, and that's blood and lymph. And these cells are in a watery matrix. So the ground substance is very watery. The fibers, the protein fibers, are actually soluble. So they're floating around and invisible to the naked eye until you need clotting. When you need clotting, these proteins, the fibrous proteins, are going to become insoluble and lock together to form the clot for you. The function of these fluid connective tissues is transportation, heat transfer, hemostasis, trying to keep your temperature the same, trying to keep your calcium levels the same, trying to keep your phosphates levels the same, trying to get your hormones around and the same. And then immune response. So we have lots of white blood cells that are in our lymph and in our blood, and they are protecting us from pathogens. When we look at blood in this picture, there are individual cells. These are red blood cells, these circular cells. We don't see a nuclei because there isn't a nuclei. These are white blood cells, even though they're purple. And there are different types of white blood cells. You'll learn about that in 232, or actually in 233. And then in this picture, we don't see very many, but that little dot there, that little dot there, those are platelets. So blood is made up of multiple types of cells: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. All right, so that's it for the connective tissues. Connective tissues, remember, are really vast, very different, and hopefully you can practice how to recognize them, know their structure and their function. All right, I will see you in another video here pretty quick, and we'll go through muscle and the nervous tissue together at the same time in the next video. All right, bye.